Minister, it is important that we acknowledge here today that at a time when the world is being assailed with campaigns of misinformation, where technology has been appropriated as a tool of hybrid warfare, that the role of journalism has never been more important. And it is this role which often provides the sole counterpoint to the increasing instances of fabricated, self-serving narratives of powerful leaders and states corrupted with ambition, which provides an intrinsic defence of justice itself. With the weaponisation of narrative, those who seek to eliminate the truth, to project it for a global audience, become the target of autocrats and criminals. Globally, in the years between 1992 and 2022, some 923 journalists have been reported as being murdered as a result of their work. And last year alone witnessed the deaths of at least 50 journalists, 302 imprisoned, including Julian Assange. Since Russia launched its bloody invasion of Ukraine in February, at least 23 journalists have been killed there, including the Irish journalist Pierre Zakrzewski. We remember Pierre and all the other journalists who have died, including here in Ireland, Irish journalists Lyra McKee and Martin O'Hagan. I also want to mention the courage and the bravery of those journalists who remain on the ground in the war zone in Ukraine, working tirelessly to uncover the truth of what is being visited upon ordinary people, often amidst dangerous and horrific conditions. Minister, on the 11th of May, just short of 2 weeks ago, Israeli forces carried out the execution of veteran American Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Shireen was shot in the face by an Israeli military sniper, despite the fact that she was wearing a blue vest, clearly identifying her as a member of the press. Her colleague, who was wounded in the attack, remained under sustained gunfire from Israeli forces for some time after the death of Shireen. Shireen was shot to silence her voice. A voice that fiercely reported on the oppression and harassment visited upon the Palestinian people by the Israeli occupation authorities. The motivation behind the attack on Shireen is similar to the motivation behind the decision by the Israeli authorities to designate 6 internationally respected Palestinian human rights NGOs as terror entities last year. And earlier this week, we have witnessed the Israeli apartheid regime refuse entry to an EU delegation to the occupied Palestinian territories. This delegation consisted of 2 Irish MEPs, amongst others, one of whom is my party colleague, Chris McManus. Israel also consistently refuses to allow the entry of UN Special Rapporteur or UN Human Rights Committee members into the occupied Palestinian territories. Israel wants to silence the civic voice of Palestine. It wants to suppress the truth of its apartheid policies. And it does not want the world to hear of its crimes. It wants to continue with the campaign of the illegal annexation of Palestinian territories. And Minister, the Israeli High Court has just ruled that the largest expulsion and forced transfer of Palestinians to take place since the beginning of the Israeli military occupation of Palestine in 1967 can go ahead, which could commence any day now. If allowed to go ahead, this would mean the forced eviction of over 1,000 Palestinians, including 500 children. The UN and international, Israeli and Palestinian human rights organisations have called this a grave violation, another grave violation of the 4th Geneva Convention and a possible war crime. And I want to take this opportunity to echo the calls of the Palestinian Authority, Minister, for the International Criminal Court to conduct an immediate investigation into the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh as a war crime. And I ask that the government and you, Minister, actively support this and move on that demand. And further, that the government and you, Minister, use Ireland's position on the UN Security Council and at the EU to call for Israel to be held totally accountable for Shireen's murder. For far too long, the international community has been allowed off the hook. and is being allowed to look the other way while these crimes continue. There is a moral onus on global leaders and governments to act once and for all, to hold Israel to account for its inhumane treatment of the Palestinian people. And the failure to act to date has merely emboldened the Israeli state, leading to greater and greater levels of oppression, to the point where they now feel confident enough to murder an internationally renowned journalist in cold blood in front of cameras. I found it remarkable, albeit predictable, to listen to the Israeli response in the immediate aftermath of the murder. I could almost hear the voice of General Mike Jackson, the former head of the British Army and the chief and first apologist on the ground for the parachute regiment of the British Army in the immediate aftermath of the Ballymurphy massacre and Bloody Sunday, and the disgraceful attempt by the Israelis to hijack and obscure the truth, to introduce doubt and confusion through reprehensible, was entirely predictable. But the truth is not that easily concealed. The Israelis took another page out of the British doctrine on counterinsurgency in Ireland when they attacked the funeral of Shireen, beating mourners mercilessly as they attempted to seize the Palestinian flag off the coffin. This is a picture that was all too common in the North during the 1980s as the British state sought, through its agents in the RUC, attempted to terrorise the nationalist population into defeat. It didn't work in the North, and it certainly will not work in Palestine. If international law is to mean anything, and it must, there absolutely needs to be a full and totally independent investigation into the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh. And I want to end with a question to you, Minister, and to the government. What is the government going to do to hold this brutal apartheid regime to account for its continuing flouting of international law? Words are welcome, but action means everything. Thanks, Councillor.